Tonight, let's go to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, and while you're turning there to Romans chapter 12, I'm going to read something. Today marks the 20th anniversary celebration of our remote asset options, our exploratory research points to quality relative programming. We now offer diplomas in deconstructed policy consulting. This is no time to bite the bullet with our synchronized transitional consulting. Did anyone understand that? I hope not, because you know where I found that? It was on a website called the Gobbledygook Generator. So it's all gibberish. It's all, you type in how many words or whatever you want, and it comes out with gobbledygook. I know that's an old saying, but it's stuff that makes no sense. And, it's important for us to understand, isn't it? That's where I want to go tonight. Just look at understanding. Because probably the hardest thing for us to understand is one another. It really is the hardest thing to understand. And I'll ask women first. How many of you understand men? I thought there'd be at least one, because really we're quite simple, aren't we, Wayne? We're very simple. Now, men. How many of you understand women? Yeah, no one's even looking at me. Look away. Well, I took some time and I sat down and I wrote a list. And this is a devotion I did with the teens. And I showed them this list and I said, this is everything I understand about women. And this was it. It's blank for you in the back, all right? Just when you think you've figured them out, no, you haven't. But it's so important for us to understand one another. What does understand mean? Well, the definition of the word understand is to have just and adequate ideas of, to comprehend, to know. Or the other definition is to have the same ideas as the person who speaks, or the ideas which a person intends to communicate. Simply put, understanding, it takes an effort. It takes an effort. You just don't naturally understand someone out without making an effort. And it's an effort in listening and in paying attention. That's what understanding is. And it's key to have understanding, to have a close relationship with anyone. And as I thought about, coming to Christ takes understanding, doesn't it? Because to understand first who God is, that's important. We need to understand that He's a holy and perfect God and that we're sinners. We have to understand that. And then we have to understand that, although that relationship is broken because of our sin, that Jesus Christ paid the price on the cross for our sin. He paid our debt. We need to understand that. And we need to understand that He's a gift. We also need to understand we don't have to work for the gift. We just need to receive Jesus. We need to receive the gift. There's understanding in that. And then once we say we have received Christ as our Savior, we need to understand that gift, that salvation is eternal. We can't lose it. It takes understanding. And then from there, we need to start studying His Word. Once we become a born-again believer, obviously the next thing is we need to understand we need to get baptized and follow Him. That's the first step that we need to take. But we need to understand that we need to walk in Him, as Colossians chapter 2 says. We need to grow in Him. And how do we do that? We need to understand God. And how do we do that? Through His Word. We need to read His Word. So it takes understanding to have a relationship with God. All those things take what? Time and effort. Time and effort. Now don't get me wrong, you don't have to work for your salvation, but it takes time and effort to understand. Now with people, it's the same thing. We can't build a relationship with one another without taking the time to understand one another. Now, why is that important? Why do we need to understand one another? There's some people we don't want to understand. Or there's some people we may never understand. But it's important for us to try and understand one another. Why? Well, for one, it helps with struggles. You really can't help anyone unless you understand where they're at in their struggle. It's also good to understand so that we can see needs. When someone has a need and it needs to be met, you can't help that need unless you understand what that need is. We need to understand to know when to pray for one another. We need to understand to avoid conflict or misunderstandings. You know, that happens far too often. There's too many, especially with texting these days. Like, you have to follow up, say, you understood, I wasn't saying it this way, right? Those misunderstandings. You want to be understood. And then also to understand it's important so we can be used of God to encourage other people. That all comes through understanding. So in this passage in Romans 12, we're going to see that understanding is really at the key. Although the word understand isn't in this passage, it's at the root of everything God here is telling us that we need to do. So in Romans chapter 12, we'll look at verses 9 to 15. Starting verse 9, it says, let love be without dissimulation. Dissimulation is like a false appearance. You're not just putting on the act of love, he's saying to love, really love. And then abhor that which is evil, and that's an extreme hatred. We're to hate evil. We're to hate it. You know, those thoughts that we think about other people, all those bad things that we see, we're supposed to hate it, and then we're to cleave to that which is good. I mean, to do all those things takes understanding, doesn't it? We're to cleave to that which is good. That's not just stay close to it. That's cleave means like a tight fit. Then in verse 10 it says, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. That word preferring means esteeming one another. That means putting other people above you. Again, Jesus, others, you. That order, putting others before you. That takes understanding. Verse 11, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Fervent, that's earnest and excited, not a false spirit that you're carrying. Verse 12, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. Instant, that word means pressing, it's urgent, you know. That takes understanding on what the prayer requests are and then being urgent in it. Distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to hospitality. Verse 14, this one's hard. Bless them which persecute you, bless and not curse. God had to say bless twice in that verse to tell us, bless, don't curse those that persecute you. That's a hard thing to do. And to do it, it takes understanding. And then it says in verse 15, rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. When we understand one another, we can do all these things. You can't do it without understanding one another. You can't love people that wrong you if you don't understand them. We don't have this natural tendency to put other people first all the time. We look from everything from a first-person perspective. Because it takes an effort to have a love for someone without that dissimulation, without a fake love. Sometimes there's people that you know, oh, I'm being loving, but this is an act. If we were all honest, there's probably someone that we've been like that with. Sometimes it takes an effort to abhor evil and keep away those thoughts that we have towards other people, that where we want revenge or something like that. And it's easy to prefer others over ourselves. It isn't easy to prefer others over ourselves, especially when the people make it hard on us. And it's certainly hard to bless those that curse us. But God says we're to rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep. And we can only do that from our heart if we truly understand, why are they rejoicing? Why are they weeping? You know, it's not just rejoice and put it on act that you're celebrating with them, even though you don't really understand why this is so important to them. Or why they're crying. Well, I'm going to cry with you, but I really don't get why you're crying. No, there's an understanding needed there. Now, we probably all know verse 15. That rejoice with them that do rejoice and weep with them that weep. But verse 16 puts everything into perspective, this understanding. Verse 16 says, be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Now, this is a verse I used a couple of years ago on a Wednesday night, and I taught it from the perspective of not being condescending Christians. And I think we probably all know this type of condescending Christian that looks down their nose and speaks down to you, and they're up here and you're down there. And we're not supposed to be that type of condescending Christian, but instead we're supposed to condescend, which means to come down to where the people are of low estate, people that are struggling. And as I looked at this passage again, I thought, you know what? This all takes understanding. To be able to condescend and come down, God's saying, come down to these people that are of low estate and understand where they're at. Because, not all the time are we just going to look at someone from up high and look down our nose purposely full of pride and arrogance and say, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. No. Sometimes we do it to be helpful without totally understanding a person's struggle, why they are where they are. And we don't take that time to condescend. Now, someone of a low estate, that means anyone that's in a low condition. So that could be spiritually, physically, financially, or even morally. So that's what this verse is talking about, with someone that is of a low estate. We're not supposed to get up on our high horse and deal with them as though we're better than them, or as though we have all the answers to solve their problems either. Now, should we give good Christian counseling? Absolutely. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But first, we have to understand where they're at. Because it's far too easy to just start spewing out godly advice and not taking the time to really understand where they're at. And like I say, that could come from a good and a noble meaning that you're thinking, I'm going to help this person, I'm just going to tell them like it is. Well, that's okay, but do you understand? We need to condescend. We need to come down. And there's some instruction in this verse. It says, be of the same mind, at the start of verse 16. Be of the same mind. What's that take? Understanding. That was literally the definition of the word, understand. Be of the same mind. We're all different, but if we listen to one another, we'll gain understanding. And then it says, mind not high things. When we see someone that's struggling, it's easy for us to get up high and judge from a distant perspective. And we can think we have all the answers. And they may even be biblical. But we can do damage if we don't understand where that person is at. And a well-meaning but bad habit we have is thinking that we have great words of wisdom that we're going to bestow. And we start blurting them out before the person we're talking to even gets out all of their struggle for us to understand. Have you ever talked to someone where you're laying out your problems, or you're trying to talk to them, and you can tell they're not listening anymore. They're working in their mind to come up with what's the next thing they're going to say to you. And they're going to give you their great wisdom. And you know what? I don't know about you, but I can't think about two things at once. So you're either listening or you're thinking about what you're going to instill in that person. So we need to be careful. If we're thinking about our response, well, that person that has the struggle still talking, we're not understanding. We're just saying, you know what? I want to give you all my wisdom and all my knowledge on how I can fix your problem for you. This verse says, mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. It's saying, rather than look at this from your perspective of not being in a struggle, come to where they are. Go down to where they are. Understand their struggle. Understand their need. Because the greatest example of all is Jesus. This is what he did. Think of Jesus with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. She even said, I'm not worthy to give you water. She knew the Samaritans were counted as half-breeds compared to the Jews, right? They were a split culture. And she knew she shouldn't even really be in his presence, but he came to where she was at the well. This was a woman that had many husbands, and the one she was with wasn't even her husband. But he went to her. Now, that's not saying we should go into the bars and everything and chase people down to where they are there. I'm talking where they're at in their life. Come down to where they are. Not look from a high and mighty perspective, but come to where they are. And the end of this verse says, be not wise in your own conceits. That word conceits means your perspective on things, or your perception of things. How you see this struggle in their lives. How you perceive it to be. We can think we have everyone else's problems all figured out from our own perspective and our own perception of the situation. But we need to be careful when we see a brother or sister struggling. We can't just offer, godly advice and not take time to fully understand their struggle. We can't understand from a high-minded perspective or our own perception. And one of the worst things we can do with someone that's struggling, just say, get over it. Move on. It's behind you now, forget it. Just do this. Just do that. By saying that, you've just minimalized their struggle. We don't want to do that. Now, sometimes there are people that need a kick in the pants and they need to hear, get over it. I've had that happen. I'm not saying that's not the case, but the majority, it takes time to understand their struggle. Because if we just look at them and say, well, you just need to do this, like it's some Band-Aid fix, no problem, it's over with, it's carelessness, and that's not understanding, that's grandstanding. That's coming from a higher position and thinking we have all the answers. Being harsh or hasty, it's rarely the solution. And in fact, it often makes the struggle worse. Because think about this, if you're in a struggle, if you've ever been in a struggle, you know someone that's been in one, and they're down, they don't want to talk to anyone else. Why? Because they don't think anyone else will understand. They won't understand. And so they push you away. But if you take the time to invest and understand, that's where you can help them. I love my friendship with Aaron because he's a business owner and I'm a business owner. And although our companies are completely different, he's dealing with $1 million homes and I'm selling products worth, thousands of dollars in t-shirts maybe, apples and oranges. But at the end of the day, our conversations are just, he understands and I understand. It's all relative, even though the money and what we do is different. It's nice having someone that understands because there's no one else that gets it like he does. So we need to try and make that opportunity to understand people. James 1:19 says, we're to be swift to hear and slow to speak. And I know that goes on to talk about wrath and anger, but this principle still fits. Swift means ready or prompt. Are we swift to hear? Are you at the ready to hear? What's this person's struggle? How can I understand where they're at better? And then slow to speak. Because God gave us 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio of input to output. And we need to use that 4 times of input to understand long before we ever output. Because what we can end up doing is hurting more than helping. Now, I've got someone in my life right now that knows where I'm at in my walk with God. It's nobody in this church, but not once has this person offered to pray for me or encourage me or, anything in that way. All this person is doing is trying to instill all their knowledge and all their wisdom in me, and it's all about them really at the end of the day. Not coming to where I'm at, but coming from where they are and trying to dump it down. That's not understanding. We all have times of rejoicing. We all have times of sorrow. And we all have times of struggle. And sometimes we can't even tell when somebody's in a struggle because we won't take the time to understand. We won't even just watch. We won't watch. We get caught up in our own lives that we can't see the sign. We can't understand. I went through 4 years of a deep struggle. And I thought for sure someone was going to see it. No one ever did. It's a lonely feeling when you're struggling. When you feel like you can't talk to anyone because no one will understand. It's tough. But I've learned also on the flip side, understanding makes a big difference with my children. Because I used to be the type that would just come down hard on them. And this is how it is, and blast them and get nowhere really. But it was until I understood that each one had their own struggles, their own problems, their own misunderstandings. That's where the relationship starts to grow. I'm not saying that I just play a blind eye to sin or anything that they do that's wrong and don't correct in that, but I'm saying, not just come from this elevated position, but to come down to where they are and trying to understand. They're humans too, with real emotions, real struggles, and they're trying to figure out life. And it's hard to figure it out from some guy way up here that's barking down at them. We need to condescend in the right way. Not be condescending, but come down to where they are and teach and show them that you understand where they're at. So tonight, this is a reminder. Like I say, this was a challenge for me. But if we see a brother or sister in a low place, don't be condescending. Rather, condescend down to them when they're struggling. Come down to where they're at. Try to understand why they're having a rough time. It's easy to have a high-minded perspective when everything's going right for us. When our lives are grand and we're walking on cloud nine, it's easy to shoot off, that person needs to do that, this person needs to do that, and they'll get it all right. That's not understanding. And it's dangerous, and we don't even realize we're doing it. I'm guilty, so I'm not preaching down at anyone in that. But it's easy to get a high-minded perspective, as this verse says. Mind not high things. We're to understand. And that word understanding is literally, it's standing under knowledge. That's what it is. It's to know something well. Today we would say we stand behind it. It's something we stand behind, we know the truth. That's what understanding is. And that's how we need to be with someone in a low condition or of a low estate, as verse 16 says. We need to be ready to listen and that wise to respond. Want to help someone? You just need to be condescending and understanding. Let's pray. Precious Father, as we come before you again here tonight, I just thank you and praise you for your word and the encouragement